A warm welcome to all of our ISM members and guests to today's program. Our speakers today will be Hari and Sarika, who are co-founders of Expent, and we'll be speaking on how leading technology companies are using AI to improve procurement. So please be sure to ask any questions using the chat or the Q&A. We will be recording today's presentation and we'll be sending the link later today with your CEH credit. Now on to the presentation. Hari was running the machine learning group at Workday for many years. Before Workday, he led multiple data initiatives at Yahoo. He has a master's in computer science majoring in AI ML from Georgia Institute of Technology. Sarika was the head of security, privacy, and compliance at PlanGrid. Prior to PlanGrid, he led security teams and initiatives at Zendesk and Autodesk. He holds a Master's of Information Security from Johns Hopkins University. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Hari and Sarika.
Hey everyone, welcome to the webinar.
Hello everyone, welcome. I'm Srikanth, warm welcome to everyone here. So my background is in security, compliance, and privacy. Prior to starting Expent, I was setting up procurement processes for a lot of companies. And when I was doing that, I realized that the process of procuring software as well as managing them was very inefficient. And the reason for the inefficiency came from people like me in security. And so we started looking at how can we make this process better. And then I started chatting with Hari, who also happens to be my brother. And we started looking at, okay, how can we make this more efficient? And that's where his background on AI came into the fore. And we looked at how we can use AI to automate a lot of the security processes. And that is what resulted in us building Expent today. Now I'll hand it off to Hari for his introduction.
Hey everyone, nice to meet all of you. Hari, we started Expent in late 2020. Prior to that, I was running the machine learning team at Workday. And as part of that role, I was involved in a lot of procurement decisions. So we had to buy a lot of tools for the org. So when I joined, the team was like pretty small. It was 5 people. Then when I left, it was 120 people. So it was a lot of growth for me. But as part of that role, since I had to procure a lot of different tools, I got involved in the process with procurement, with legal, with security, with compliance, and all the other stakeholders involved. And many times when we are trying to get some tools, it was not a couple of weeks of work, or it was not like 2 months of work. Though we knew which tool we need to buy, the process itself took a long time. And in some cases, it was like 6 months to a year. And that was not the best use of our time. My team was frustrated. Our customers were frustrated because they were not able to use the exact tool that they wanted. And across the board, we were not necessarily a happy bunch whenever we want to buy something. And that's when Srikanth and I started talking, and I asked him, hey, why do you guys slow things down as people from security and people from legal? And he explained in terms of why that happens. And like what we realized was this entire process, there are lots of inefficiencies, there are lots of bottlenecks in the process. And that is where AI can come in. When, once we brought in AI to those specific bottlenecks, we can make it much easier. And that's kind of our goal for building this company, Expent. We'll talk more about it. And we'll also talk about at a high level, what is AI and where can we use AI in procurement, and where are the different applications where it is actually pretty valuable. Before we get started, a couple of tactical items. So please use the Q&A functionality or chat functionality to ask any questions at any time. There are 2 of us. One of us will be doing the talking, the other one will be looking at the questions, and we'll be happy to answer those questions. And second, we'll also have a few poll questions in between. So please do answer that. That will help us kind of get an insight of the group so that we can move around in the right direction. So with that, let's continue a little bit.
Oh, just to give you all an overview of what Expent is before we jump into the program for the today. So Expent is a vendor lifecycle management platform. So when you think about the broader lifecycle management, there are 2 areas, which is pre-procurement and post-procurement. With the pre-procurement, Expent helps you know what software or what vendors are out there in a particular area. So you have a problem, you go to Expent, you look it up and say, okay, here's my problem. And what are the different things that are out there that will help solve this problem for me? So Expent can help you discover that universe, as well as help you do that research to learn more about the supplier, right? Once you do that, obviously there are a lot of suppliers out there for solving a single problem. Now, how do I shortlist that, right? That's where Expent sort of uses AI to provide personalized recommendations for you. So with Expent's personalized recommendations, instead of looking at hundreds of suppliers, you're looking at 5 or 10, right? With that 5 or 10, now if your process involves you to run an RFP, you could run an RFP, right? Or you could do a simple evaluation process to figure out, okay, here are my requirements, here are the different suppliers. Let's look at which suppliers meet those requirements. So you're able to do that side-by-side comparison or analysis with an Expent. Once you do that, you've made the decision that, okay, here's the supplier that we're going to procure. Then you put it through your procurement process using your P2P solutions. Once you do that, what Expent does on the back end of the post-procurement is give you an application catalog. What that is a collection of all your suppliers in one place. And Expent also allows you to aggregate all information and metadata related to that vendor in one central location. On top of that, we provide you intelligence to tell you how that supplier is being utilized. Is it like how many of the licenses did you purchase? How many of them are actively used? How many of them are not used, right? And then we allow you to perform business reviews to understand the performance of the vendor. It's like just the way you do performance reviews on employees, it's only fair that we do performance reviews on our suppliers to see whether they are continuing to meet our business needs and goals. That's what Expent helps you to do. And then Expent parses out your contracts to help you understand the key payment terms, like, hey, what's the renewal date? How much are we paying? What are the license types? And all of that important information. We aggregate, once we get all of this information, we aggregate and provide you a single place where you can go. It's called your renewal page, that you can see all the basic information on who are the key people, like who are the internal and external stakeholders related to this particular supplier, and then how well it is being adopted inside the organization. How well is the supplier doing based on feedback from the business reviews? And then if your process involves you running a survey with your internal stakeholders to see how well the supplier is doing, you could bring that in as well. And then the spend aspect of it, which is how much are you spending, how much could you be spending, and all of that. And to get all of this information in one place, so when you walk into your negotiation with your vendors, you have all of the talking points for you that will help you negotiate better strategic contracts. And that's what Expent helps you do. Now, if you decide that you don't want to renew that vendor, Expent helps you provide recommendations on what are the alternate suppliers that may actually solve your need. And that's exactly why we call Expent as the vendor lifecycle management platform, because we start all the way from sourcing up until renewals. And should something not work at the renewal stage, we bring you back into sourcing and help you procure the new vendor. With that context, let's launch a poll. So what we're trying to do here is, do you think you use any AI technology on a daily basis? It'll be great if you guys can go, punch those answers in. That'll help us understand where you people stand. It seems like we are trending on the right direction. A good amount of people know what AI is, and that's amazing.
I mean, this is fascinating. So it looks like there are like almost 50% of the folks think that they use some AI technology on a daily basis. I'm curious. So can you put what's your favorite AI technology that you guys are using in the chat, so that gives a sense of what your favorite AI technology is? If you can just throw that in the chat, that would be great.
We have about 55% participation rate at this point, and it's going up. We are hitting those numbers. Nice. Alexa, chatbot, SAP, Google. Well, Google is a good one.
All right, so that is almost everyone, I guess. looks like almost 62% of you said that you are using some AI technology on a daily basis, which is great. But even for those who are saying no, and I don't know, I think you'd be surprised to know that you are actually using some AI technology. It looks like fewer than like half the consumers believe that they understand AI and they use AI. So this is definitely an above average group, clearly, because many of you said that you are using AI, which is great. So now, what is AI? Let's start there. Let's give a high level understanding of what is AI, and we can take it from there. So what is AI? Is it these bots that you see in the iRobot movie, or is it these bots that you see in the Starlink or the Terminator 2, the Starlink movies? Or is it this Sophia, which is out there? When asked what is her major goal in life, her major goal was to destroy humans. Definitely, we are not talking about this AI. If you think about AI right now, this is probably not too far from the current state where people think that AI is going to destroy the world. But my neural network is currently thinking that, okay, this is a dog, whereas it's a cat. So that's the current state. It's not like too different. Jokes aside, the current state of AI, we can do really well in terms of classifications if we have enough data. Like here, even for humans, it's slightly tricky to find which one is a muffin and which one is a chihuahua. And here, similarly, which one is a dog and which one is a mop? I mean, they look pretty similar, right? So these are some areas that AI has gotten much better in the last few years to classify these images. But for all of that, you need a lot of training data. So what is AI good at? AI is actually, I mean, think of AI almost as like augmented intelligence and not necessarily artificial intelligence. And like it is really good at turning like large amounts of data into actionable information that is needed to make better business decisions. Like that's kind of how you can think of AI at this point. And there are some applications of AI. I'm glad that you guys brought some of the popular applications like Alexa. That's a fantastic example. So let's start with a few, right? I mean, almost all of you would have used Amazon at some point. In Amazon, as long as you as you go in, you don't necessarily search for stuff, but as you search, you see similar products, you see people who used or who bought this, also bought this. All of that is built on like some aspects of AI. And also there's recommendations out there, like people like you prefer this, you should be buying this. And as you can see, recommended for you because you purchased this. All of that has been like AI and machine learning, and that's been there for almost like 15, 20 years. Google, a few folks answered in the chat as well as favorite technology, Google across the board, like from search to emails to calendars to autocomplete, everything is built on top of some AI technology. And yeah, someone answered Alexa as well. It could be Siri, it could be Google Assistant, it could be Alexa, all of those voice assistants that we use on a regular basis, almost all the homes. Like I think there's a study which said that by 2025, 90% of the homes will have some component of AI. And that's absolutely true. It's already embedding in your house. And finally, we also have something like a self-driving cars, which is a little bit, I mean, I wouldn't say it's out there. I mean, a few years back, if you'd asked me, yeah, it's still out there, but now it's current. Like there are lots of self-driving car companies and it's doing pretty well. But some of these are like pretty broad applications of AI. And for procurement, for our talk right now, we are not talking about these broader applications. So AI can be like broad, or a general purpose AI, which is the robot or whatever you want to call it, the Optimus Prime that Elon Musk talks about. So all of those are like general purpose AI. What we need for procurement is much more a narrow AI. All we need is, okay, look at this invoice, figure out whether it's a direct or an indirect, and figure out which department does it goes to, like classify the invoice, parse the data, use OCR, and finally file it. Like that's the narrow AI which we'll be using in procurement. Which brings me to the next poll question. Do you guys use any AI technology in procurement currently? Would love to know if you know and if you're using anything, or if you don't know actually if you're using or not. All right, the trend is in a interesting direction here. It's either mostly no or I don't know, which is fair, and I'll tell you why in a little bit as we get more answers trickling in.
For those of you that answered yes, it'll be great to hear what technology you use in procurement today. That will help us also understand where people stand on that.
Yeah, for the four of you, I think, who have said yes, would love to hear what technologies you use from AI exactly in procurement. If you can put that in the chat, that would be awesome. All right, we are almost there at the 50% participation mark. Hoping for a little bit more. But it's mostly, I mean, I think we can see a pattern here. It's mostly trending towards no or no, or I don't know. All right, we'll give a couple more seconds, a few more seconds, and then we'll end the poll. Getting towards 60% now. All right, I think that's about it. Yeah, we have like 14% of you saying, yes, we do use some AI technology. So please put that in the chat. 43% and 43% saying no, and I don't know, which is fair, because according to this survey in 2019, this is the results. As you were saying, 14%, 43 and 43. I don't know whether you're able to see that screen, but yeah, according to the 2019 survey, 51% of the CPOs reported that they used advanced analytics, and 25% of them indicated to have piloted an AI solution in the procurement process. So it's not a lot. And out of this 25%, only 9% actually kind of implemented it fully from a pilot to a full time. So clearly, there's not a lot of technology out there in AI, specifically on the procurement side of things. But the good thing is, almost 93% of the 51% of CPOs who were talking about advanced analytics were actually satisfied with using AI and using advanced analytics. So the good news is people who used AI are very happy, but the news where we can improve on is like AI is not adopted really well. We'll talk about how that could change as well in the future. But yeah, there's a lot of room for adoption in AI, specifically on the procurement side of things. So there are multiple different types of AI technologies, right? So the AI or artificial intelligence is the broader field, and it's been there since, I don't know, 1940s, 1950s, when the term was coined by Turing. So it encompasses a lot of different things, and it usually brings up the image of a robot or whatever, right? But there are other aspects of smaller areas inside of AI, which is much more practical, very useful. We'll talk about those a little bit as well. I'm pretty sure you would have heard about this area called natural language processing, which is just understanding what the language is. This is how Alexa works. This is how Google works. This is how Siri works. And also, like when you're producing a language, that is called natural language generation. When you're trying to understand, it's NLU, natural language understanding. All of that is inside an NLP. So when you have an invoice or a contract, when we're trying to parse that invoice and contract and try to find what key information is there, trying to understand the language behind all of this, that falls under the broader bucket of NLP. And then there is machine learning. Machine learning, there are two broad areas of machine learning, which is also an area under AI. So one is the supervised learning, where you have a lot of training data, like which happens to be a lot in procurement. In procurement side, we have a lot of data about who we partnered with in the past, who we are partnering with in the future, like which can help us predict who we are going to partner in the future. But in addition to that, we also know who's using what product. You have all the contracts, all the invoices, everything is put in place, and all of that falls under the bucket of supervised learning. And there is also something called unsupervised learning, where we don't have a lot of training data, which doesn't apply to us specifically on the procurement side, because we do have a lot of data. And then there is deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning, where it tries to mimic your human brain. We do use some aspects of deep learning for understanding of NLP and other things, but doesn't have like broad applicability in what we are talking about here. And there's also another area which I don't consider AI, but some people might. It's called RPA, robotic process automation. And that is, if you can think about it, it's just software bots which does tasks repeated by humans, and which are boring and mundane. It can do it over and over and over again. And that's like robotic process automation. It's more about automating some of these mundane tasks. Now, for our final poll question, what areas of procurement would you like to be augmented by AI? I mean, there are a bunch of areas in the procurement process, and given all of you are experts in the procurement field, there are lots of areas. Which ones do you think can be augmented by AI and help you on your day-to-day life? Oh, it's pretty evenly distributed at this point. All right, we have almost 50% participation. Looks pretty even. So we have like 56% saying vendor research, which is definitely a huge area where we can, where like there's a lot of benefit. Almost 50% of the people are also saying vendor evaluation, and 81% overwhelmingly say that spend analytics can be benefited using AI. And then 58% is also mentioning about vendor management. And there's renewals and QBRs. So let me share so you can see the results right now. So this shows how important folks think AI is. All right, now let's keep moving on. So where can AI be used in sourcing? Like, as we all know, sourcing has a lot of different facets in them. The first piece is like, you need to, let's say you have a problem, right? And you need to find a solution for that. I mean, and many of these times, these solutions are provided by vendors. So if there is a problem, there might be hundreds of solutions out there. And for those hundreds of solutions, if you're going to send an RFP and evaluate all 100, that might not be the best use of your time or money. So instead, it would be great if you can reduce that 100 plus solutions into 10 solutions. And that is where like AI can come in. Like, it can find patterns in terms of what you have done in the past, like based on your current vendors, based on your peer network. It can get all of that information and provide you specific recommendations, which can reduce it to 10. And once you have those like 10 vendors, you can then evaluate or kick off a workflow, which is for like 3 of those. And then you can run an RFP, RFx if you need for those 3, and then do an internal vendor evaluation of that. And finally, like connect with your P2P system and procure that vendor and then have it internally as an application catalog. That's kind of the broader process. And this process can be unique for every single company, depending on the company itself, depending on the vendor and their vertical, depending on the geographical area, because if it's a EU vendor, it's going to be different. If it's a US, it's going to be different. So that's how it's going to be working. And finally, as we discussed in the beginning of the call, there are lots of inefficiencies and bottlenecks as part of this. And like, which is where AI is really good at, to make it much more like seamless, and it can process large amounts of data to make it easier. So in terms of research and discovery, I remember 58% of you have said that we can definitely help there. AI can help there. Absolutely. And this is where you have seen some of this in Google, some of this in Amazon, where we help you with search or recommendations, personalized recommendations, right? So if we understand more about the company and the user within that company, we can make those recommendations in terms of, hey, you have used these vendors in the past, which means you tend to sign contracts this way. So maybe this vendor might work well for you. Or in many cases, what we have noticed is people just call their buddy in a different company and ask, hey, for this problem, what have you used? So that is another place where we can help a lot, because we have a vendor graph in the backend, or we can build a vendor graph in the backend where all the vendors are connected with each other, all the companies are connected with each other. And once we do that piece in terms of having the right kind of graph, then organically we can say, hey, these are your peers who are in the same vertical, who are trying to solve the same problem, but these are the vendors that they are using. Maybe you should also try that and use that. So that will make it easier in terms of peer network. Finally, the most important aspect of using AI and machine learning is you can avoid that bias. Just because someone did something better, we might not like sway our decision on that. We'll make a holistic data-driven decision based on how they are doing across the board, not just for 1 or 2 different things. And as we were talking about, it could be a push-based information where, or pull-based information where if you want something, you can go and search for it, like in Amazon. But there is also a push-based information here where we push, or AI can push recommendations onto you, which means even before you know that you need some solution, AI can say that, hey, based on these vendors that they have procured, you might need this particular piece because there's a hole there. So you go and get it. So that is where the recommendations come in. The next piece is like sourcing workflows. Every company will have its own process in terms of who to loop in, what the process should be, etc. Right? So for aspects of that, there should be some optimization of workflows, and that is where AI can come in, and AI can help you figure out those inefficiencies or bottlenecks and try to make that seamless and make it easier. And also, again, the peer network comes in. Hey, your peers are looking at these in such a way. Maybe it will benefit you this way. So all of that benefit comes there. The next piece is around like RFx and evaluations. As we all know, RFx is pretty painful. Like I think in 2021, all like some of the seller sites, they did like 260 RFPs a year. Like that's a lot, right? And think about if RFPs take 2 or 3 weeks per RFP, that's like consuming the entire year 3 times over. And you don't need stuff like that. I mean, that's where AI can help. AI can help with like creating an RFP light, which is like, okay, ask only the relevant question based on the available information. Don't ask unnecessary questions which might not lead to a decision at all. So AI can help with that. You can also pre-populate answers. You have asked certain questions to a vendor. Don't repeat those answers, questions again. Try to fill it in pretty easily. And also it will help you figure out who are the right people inside the company and also outside the company who you should be sending these RFPs to. So AI can help shorten the cycle across the board. And a recent study suggested that AI can shorten RFP cycle times by as much as like 50% by just applying analytics to the available information and to get the right kind of information. All right. So that's about RFPs. And the next RFPs is more external. You do evaluations, which is much more internal, and recommending the right stakeholders or personnel inside to get the things moving faster. That's another piece where AI can help with. Like as like AI algorithms, they can figure out, okay, these are the people who have these skills, and these skills are absolutely needed in these aspects of the procurement lifecycle, and then they would just recommend those people. So across the board, all of that can be made much, much faster. And finally, we have the application catalog. Like we essentially can, after RFP and evaluation is done, we procure the vendor. And once we procure the vendor, we bring in those vendors internal to the company, right? So when someone is, I mean, this is one of the things which Srikanth was talking about as a vendor lifecycle management suite, where if you're trying to renew something, or if someone internal to the company is trying to buy something, first have a look at what is available inside, and then make a decision based on that. Like instead of going and purchasing something which is duplicate or extra, just try to use the existing products or solutions that you have. And that's part of like utilization of the vendors in general. And the other piece of that is, as a user who you join your company relatively recently, would be great for you to know what are the different tools or what are the different vendors out there that your company is using currently, and who are the different people inside the company who are using that. So based on your title, based on your role, based on your function, wouldn't it be great if someone recommends, okay, these are the tools you should be using to make your job easier? And that would save a lot of time and money instead of you going and hunting for those tools based on your peers inside the company. So that's these are places where AI can be definitely beneficial. And once you have procured, so all what we spoke about was on the sourcing side much more, which was like the pre-procurement side of things. Now let's talk about the post-procurement side of things. So once we have procured these solutions, you need to do vendor management, right? So you need to make sure that you're making the best use of all the vendors that you already have, because you're paying the money and you've gone through the review, you've already paid the cost. So let's make sure that they are put to best use. So the first thing that comes in is you can save a lot of money and time here, but we need to know what are the vendors out there currently. And this would be super useful for like IT folks as well as the procurement folks to categorize the vendors automatically. And AI is really good at that. As we discussed, AI can consume large amounts of information and make sense out of it to make data-driven decisions, right? So here it can look at all aspects of vendor, all the metadata, all the vendor data, and classify them. Okay, these belong in the IT category, and these belong in the manufacturing category, or these belong in the goods category, or these belong in the direct category, or whatever, right? So we can categorize and classify these vendors perfectly well, depending on the data that we have. And that is something which has been there as a problem for procurement from the beginning, and AI can definitely help with that. And that is one of the like strong suites of AI. AI is really good there, and we should utilize it for that. And another way to use the application catalog is let's say that you have a 10,000 people company, a lot of people are interested in specific vendors, they can go and add specific vendors to wish list. And as they add those products for wish list, you're crowdsourcing requests from the company. That way, you know, when you're trying to buy something next, if the crowdsourcing request is pointing to one source, you buy that instead of buying something else. So that's a way in which we can collect the wish list and eventually do personalized recommendations. I mean, at that point, you can figure out for this department, which is like marketing, for instance, these are the different vendors which might work very well for them, because we know that they are marketing. And these are the marketing tools that people have crowdsourced and shown interest in. So we can do that. Similarly, we can also block certain products. We can mark certain products as like certain vendors as like limited use because of whatever reasons, right? It could be security, it could be compliance. Like you can do all of that. The next step is metrics and engagement analytics. I mean, this is one of the things where this and spend, where the like almost 80% of you said that AI can definitely benefit that. And I completely agree with that. Because with AI, you can identify trends. And as we discussed, AI is really good at consuming large amounts of information and making sense out of it. So if you are able to see the historical trend of how different suppliers work, how your contracts work, how the trend has changed over the last few years, few months, we can help with not just the future planning, but also will help you with anomalies, will help you give good supplier insights. Let's say if there's a security breach for a specific company, you'll get to know about that because we can process large amounts of information and tell you that. So you can kind of manage risks there. And also there are chatbots out there which can help you chat with specific vendors, or like these are like knowledge-based chatbots where AI can consume a lot of this information, have FAQs, like question answers already built in. And once these chatbots come in, you can just go in and ask questions, and these chatbots will help you with like help articles and easy answers. So these are places where AI is really good at, and we have like good solid NLP, machine learning. We have made significant progress in the last 5 years where all of this is actually AI strong suit. And like this helps with SRM and also like managing risks in general. It could be security risk. It could be geopolitical risk because we can process that information from the social or wherever. We can also look at macroeconomic conditions and kind of give you insights in terms of what is working and what is not. And then business reviews. I mean, most of you are familiar with QBRs. It could be quarterly business reviews. It could be half yearly. It could be yearly. So instead of going and doing all of this manually, if we have all of this information already out there, we can pre-populate all of this information for the review, where it's all about like literally looking at the information and reviewing the information instead of going and filling in from the beginning, which actually takes a lot of time. And like there are specific teams to do QBRs, and think of how they could be like utilized better if there is a way in which you can automate some of this and then use them for their higher faculty to kind of just review it instead of having to go and do this mundane work. I mean, that is one thing which can definitely be done with AI. And also compliance monitoring, right? So if there's CCPA, there's GDPR, there are lots of these changes which are coming through, and it would be great if you are able to monitor the like how things are changing, both on all the aspects that we mentioned earlier. It could be security, it could be financial. Someone is going to be acquired by your competitor. Good to know that, so that you can see whether it's still compliant or not. Geopolitical risk, maybe like the situation that is happening right now, we might not be able to work with a specific country. All that can be handled pretty easily, and we can monitor compliance that way. And like for all of the QBRs, you also need to know whether your users are actually happy with it or not, right? You need to do 360-degree feedback. So that is where the survey part comes in, where it surveys, it's not just for internal, but also you can send it to the external folks. And a lot of these things can be automated using AI, where we can find who are the right people who you should essentially be sending these surveys to. Like with metrics and engagement analytics, we know who are the people who are using the product, who are the people who are not using the product, though they procured the product, right? So if we get all those insights, we can send surveys to the right kind of folks. And once we send surveys to the right kind of folks, it's very easy for us to ask them the question, or AI to determine who to ask what questions to. So you can ask questions about how do you like the product and all that for people who are actually using the product. And you can ask questions like, why are you not using the product, to people who are not using the product, so that you get the right kind of insights, so that you have all the data when it comes to like renewal decision or whatever decision you want to make, right? Almost 81% of you said that like spend visibility can be definitely helped with AI. 100% with you on that. Analytics, dashboarding, and visualization is a strong suite of AI. And and like the important thing that CPOs want, based on a Deloitte 2018 survey, was almost 65% of procurement leaders, folks like you, said that they have limited visibility into their supply chain, and like they would like to improve transparency. And all that can happen with just the spend visibility. And with spend visibility, what do? We try to figure out who are the vendors. Can we bucket them into different categories? That way, you know what your category spend is. And for that to happen, you need to know, okay, these are the invoices, these are the contracts. You can do the same, use the same vendor for 10 different things. So how do you categorize them into the right buckets? And how do you know how much you're spending for specific categories is where AI is really good at. So you get the invoice, you match it with the specific categories, and you get the spend analytics and figure out that, hey, are there anomalies here? Is there something that looks fraudulent? I mean, there have been several issues in the past where there are vendors, fake vendors, who come in and say, hey, yeah, you need to pay for this. And all of those, if you have the right kind of system in-house, you can definitely detect anomalies, and we can help with that. And finally, with the invoice and contract parsing, this is an area where AI is currently helping. It's not like even in the future. There are lots of different things. OCR, as you guys are mostly familiar with, optical character recognition. Once an invoice or a contract is scanned, it extracts all the characters and everything else in the invoice and the contract out. And then making sense of it is where NLP comes in, where we can extract specific entities from the contracts, specific entities from the invoices. And once we get all that information, it makes it much easier for you to match the invoice, to cluster them, club them into different buckets, and to think about anomalies and stuff. So this is on the vendor management side of things, where AI can be definitely beneficial. Now, if you look at the vendor lifecycle management as a whole, I mean, this might be something that you guys are all familiar with. So we start with the strategic sourcing. So there's this new term which is coming up a lot called cognitive sourcing, which is almost like guided buying, right? We have a lot of information and we do guided buying through that. And then once you kind of figure out who is the vendor that you're going to buy, that is the strategic sourcing piece. Next comes the contract management. You need to make sure that the contract lifecycle is managed properly. You scan the contract contents, and that's where you use NLP, NLU, natural language processing, and natural language understanding, so that you can kind of bucket them in the right buckets. Then comes the supplier risk management. So once you have enough data about the different suppliers, then you can figure out, are they in a compliance risk? Are they in a geographical risk, geopolitical risk, or wherever, right? So you can figure out the risks associated with them. That way you can make a decision quickly. Hey, there's a risk which is upcoming for this supplier. Maybe look for an alternative so that you have continuous service without any breakage. Or in some cases, you can just churn them. Oh yeah, there's a risk coming in and I'm not using it as much. Let's just throw it away. And then purchasing, that's an important piece that helps. We can have chatbots which are working like assistants, where you can just come in as the chatbot for, hey, I need more pencils or pens, or it could be office supplies, or I need more licenses. It could be you have 100 licenses for Zoom. You recently hired 10 more employees. So you need 10 more licenses. You can just go to that chatbot, and the chatbot can do the work for you. So this is a combination of a chatbot and an RPA, because some of these are mundane repeated stuff, and RPA can definitely help you with that. And then around payments, again, machine learning can definitely help track the payment, make sure that there is no fraud, help you with anomaly detection across there, and all that good stuff. Then spend analysis, as we spoke about, machine learning can classify the invoices and the contracts into different buckets, make sure that you're getting paid on time, and make sure that these suppliers are all bucketed correctly, so that you have a good idea of where your money is going, so that you can plan well for the next year. And even in some cases, you can save a lot of money because you're spending a lot of money in some area which is not utilized well. Maybe you can churn that. And then finally, I don't know whether you guys are able to see this properly, but supplier identification. This is a pretty big challenge across the board, which is entity detection, right? Because the same name can be used by multiple suppliers. So how do you identify them? And this is an area which is even harder for humans at this point. So AI is, think of it as an augmented intelligence piece here, where it will assist humans to say that, okay, this and this seem to be the same. Do you think it is? And once we get more and more confirmation, AI can kind of improve itself and train and get better at it. And this is how AI can be used across vendor lifecycle management. And finally, as we were discussing earlier, it's not just about AI. I mean, now we know that AI is definitely beneficial, but not everyone is using it. I mean, as we said, in 2020, only 9% of the procurement officers have actually implemented an AI system in their day-to-day workforce. And why is that? I mean, AI adoption is tricky, right? So, and it's because of multiple reasons. It's first of all, it's a technology which is not necessarily well understood, as we saw in the beginning. And based on a McKinsey study, the best way to do it is to actually bring in the experts and then help them set it out for you. Or the other way is actually bring a solution which is already employing a lot of AI and technology sprinkled in, and then see how that will be beneficial instead of you trying to build it from scratch. And that is where like a lot of companies are out there which can help with building, but also something which is already built can also be beneficial. The more important thing here is, as I've iterated multiple times, we are talking about narrow AI here in procurement, not necessarily broad general purpose AI. When we talk about narrow AI, it's just going to be specific task-based AI. So it's like, think of not AI as a technology around which you need to build your product, but think of AI as like a tool which can be sprinkled in multiple places in your product to make your life easier. So think of all the inefficiencies, and AI can be sprinkled here and there across the inefficiencies to make that easier. And that is where AI is like really good at. Humans are really good at context awareness, and they have the ability to solve broad problems. But AI is like AI or any of these software algorithms are available 24/7, and they don't get bored with repetitive and mundane tasks. And they have like, they don't cost much to operate. So that is the benefit, and those are the advantages of using such technologies. So it should be a mix of where humans are good at and where AI can help them, so that the mundane tasks are removed from their plate, so that they can focus on higher tasks, which only they can do. So with that, we'll quickly touch base on Expent. As Srikanth spoke about earlier, we have thought about, like, from my experience working in AI for the last 15 years, like doing a PhD, dropping out of a PhD in AI and machine learning, AI has come a long way in terms of practical applications of AI. And the reason we started Expent in the first place is we saw that AI can definitely benefit the procurement workforce and the procurement area in general, because there are lots of inefficiencies which AI has gotten really good at in the last few years in other areas. Like, for instance, we know that AI is pretty good at like natural language understanding now because of the use of Alexa, because of the use of Siri and Google Home or whatnot, right? So the language understanding part has gotten much better in the last few years. There are lots of algorithms which are on the B2C side. Why can't we apply to the procurement side? Here also, there's a lot of language out there with contracts, with invoices. We can use the same. Similarly, there are lots of good progress made around vision, computer vision, like self-driving cars needs vision. Everything else needs vision. So use those advancements to understand your documents better, like scan the documents, scan the invoice better, scan the contract better. So you see, okay, these are the specific characters, and then use the advancements in language processing to understand what it means so that you can classify all of that. So those are lots of tools available. So we have sprinkled all the different tools that we have in our in what we have. So you can see we have the research and discovery piece, and this is where we help you with personalized recommendations of vendors, sourcing workflows. We help you optimize your process, remove some of your bottlenecks. RFx, remove duplicate questions, pre-populate answers for certain questions, make it RFP light, make RFP actually a little bit like fun instead of it just being that boring 300 questions where you need to answer. Help you with evaluations so that you know, okay, these are internal products or internal stakeholders who need to be part of this evaluation, so that the entire process is much more seamless and easier. And also on the vendor management side, we help you with like figuring out usage, who's using it, how many times are they using it, is it actually useful, and give you trend analysis in terms of, okay, this is how you spent last year, this is how you're going to potentially spend, like forecasting. All that is something that we can help with. Like the application catalog piece, where end users can come in and see, okay, these are products which are already available. Instead of going and looking out and buying something new, they can look at what is already available out there for them, so that you just extend a license instead of going through another complete new procurement. And help you with like spend, of course, that's the biggest thing. And we have a renewal calendar, which we populate with a lot of information, starting from like usage, like other vendors internal to your company, other vendors outside, who are your peers, what are they using for this. That way you can go into renewal conversations with the right kind of, armed with the right kind of information, so that you can negotiate it properly, instead of it being a one-off, not data-driven decision. This will be a much more strong data-driven decision. So in a summary, these are the key areas where AI can be definitely helping in procurement. I mean, we spoke about the application catalog, research and discovery. I mean, this is very similar to the poll question. I think uniformly, everyone said that, okay, we can be helped everywhere, and that is true. All of these areas can benefit from AI, and like AI is definitely a good place to start in terms of, I mean, now is a good time to start with AI for your journey, because AI has gotten to a stage where it's not anymore a nascent technology which needs to be tested. It's a little bit mature technology, and you can see a lot of these AI applications on the consumer world. So definitely there's a lot of benefit to use AI and machine learning, even on the procurement world and other things. So with that, I think that's all we had as content, but we are open for a lot of questions and happy to discuss more.
Hari, there was one question from Jorge. What would be your off-the-shelf recommendation for the period for retraining models?
Depends on the context in terms of, I mean, retraining models could be for anything. So what specific context are you talking about? Let's see.
Jorge, if you're able to type the response in chat, that'll largely help us answer your question.
Because the answer for that is it depends, but it will be good to understand which area you're talking about so that we can figure that out. So was it part of the chat, Srikanth?
Yes.
Any other questions from anyone while we're getting a follow up on that? Yeah, I can see that, John, you're asking for some key software vendors. So if you're looking for like key software vendors in the procurement side of things, there are not a lot of vendors out there who are using AI for some of these. I mean, there are some companies which are trying to do, and of course, Expent, without being biased, and that is one thing which AI can also help you with, and we are also trying to do that without being biased. Expent is one where we have used AI to make sure that it makes it much easier. But there are a few others out there. There's this company called Xylo, which helps you with some application catalog. And G2 is another one which has a lot of reviews, a lot of data out there, so they can definitely build a good AI system on top of that. And Gartner has good review of some aspects of what are good AI companies which can help in the procurement space, specifically for the research and discovery. But these are the most popular ones, and really good AI companies out there right now are definitely the Googles of the world, the Amazons of the world. They have really good AI technology for multiple other things, and we are also using AWS and GCP for what we are trying to solve. Okay, so off the shelf, for I know there could be different applications. Okay, so like retraining period, if the data is going to come in once every day or once every week, so you would have to retrain in that cadence. If the data is not going to come in, if the data is not going to change that frequently, you don't have to retrain that frequently. For in my previous life, in one of the previous jobs that I was doing, we used to get data updated once every month. So we used to retrain once every month. So things are not going to change that drastically. Whereas for a different model, we used to get feedback consistently from user based on what you click, based on what you typed. We used to collect feedback. So their retraining has to be done every few hours. So it depends on the complexity of the model, depends on the application. So I would say the retraining would depend on all of these aspects. Is that
Jorge has actually provided more context. It's like for predicting scenarios such as changes in pricing.
Yep. So changes in pricing is a little bit more real time, much more than like waiting for a month. So I would say in some of those cases, like if you're looking at something like a stock market, you have to train it every few minutes, not even every few hours, right? So whereas if you're looking at pricing for products and stuff, once every day to 2 days, you should have enough information, because if you're looking at like, for instance, in Expent, we have like 90,000 plus vendors. And when we have 90,000 plus vendors, the prices keeps changing across some of these vendors on a daily basis. So we do have some training which will happen on a relatively frequent basis.
And then we have another question from Eileen. What are examples of AI implementation of Expent clients, that is lead time, resources, etc.? What were the outcomes in terms of efficiency, productivity gains?
Yeah, that's a great question, Eileen. So one thing which we need to definitely mention is there's not a lot of implementation for Expent at this point, because we try to grab as much information as possible even before our clients are onboarded, because there are lots of information about clients which are available out there online. We try to get that information to start with, But once we get started there, then it's about a couple hours where we can extract all the information in terms of, okay, your event logs, we use your single sign-on to get some of this information. And once we do that, like get the single sign-on and stuff, then it's about a couple days for us to completely train and get the right kind of system. And in terms of like breaking down inefficiencies and making it efficient for productivity gains, specifically on the, what we have noticed is we have made the procurement process like at least 5x faster for a couple of our clients. And on the vendor management side is another place where we have benefited a lot, because we have avoided them spending on duplicate vendors at least once a month when end users are trying to look for certain things. So these are some areas where we have not just come up with like looking at efficiencies, but also saving cost and like saving money and saving time. All right, so George, you have one more question. So you're recommending retraining in line with data refresh frequency. That is quite frequent and intensive. How do you justify the cost associated with such effort? That's a good question. So it depends on the return on investment that you're expecting from this model. If pricing is the core aspect that you're looking for to optimize, then if that is your business, then you can definitely justify why you need to train frequently. But you don't have to train the entire model every single time either, right? So there are lots of newer advancements in machine learning, like specifically distributed machine learning, federated learning. There are aspects which are coming up, which are up and coming, which have improved a lot in the last 2-3 years, where you can just improve those or retrain only on those specific features and specific things which you're trying to retrain on. You don't have to retrain on everything. Just look at those incremental stuff, and then you can do that beyond that. And that is where like machine learning is improved quite a bit in the recent years. All right, the next question is about federal agencies. Yeah, Srikanth, I think you're.
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, Shakira. So there have been a few agencies that have inquired with us, and we are chatting. But if you're interested in chatting further, we would be very interested in going through the FedRAMP process. As you know, we need a sponsor to go through that process, and we would love to work with you if you're willing to chat further.
Yeah, a couple of things to add there, Shakira. So we are talking with a couple of agencies who are actually on the government side. We cannot name them, as you can imagine. And they want to just modernize their procurement process. So we are just having an initial chat with them. But also in our previous lives, we have done a lot of these work, both as part of Workday for me and as part of Plan Grid for Srikanth, where we have done this in the past. And some of our like peers from our previous companies, colleagues, are part of like advisory boards for government for AI, for instance. So we understand some of the challenges involved specifically for AI in procurement, but there is reasonable interest up and coming right now, specifically in this area. Given AI is being used everywhere else, why not in procurement, and why not procurement in government? That's something which is up and coming. All right, we have a few more minutes. Any other questions? All right, looks like that's about it. So we'll have our contact information and all that. Kathy would send that in the email. So even if you have other questions which are coming up later, please feel free to reach out to us. Happy to answer those questions and happy to engage in any form or fashion.
Thank you both for such a great discussion. Very informative, a lot of information out there. We will be emailing out the recording link a little bit later today with your continuing education hour for today. I also will send out their contact information. So if you'd like to contact them directly, you can do so at your leisure, definitely. As I said, thank you again for everybody joining us today. I just wanted to mention briefly that tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Tom Deary, the CEO from ISM, will be talking about a different topic, the economic climate. Where are we now and what lies ahead? Another interesting topic. At this time, I'm going to close the program out.
Kathy, 1 second.
Sure.
We have one more question from Sheila.
Oh, definitely. Go ahead.
Hi, Sheila. Yeah, that's an important point, how do you justify the investment? So I'll give you from my personal anecdote, right? So when I joined Workday didn't have a good machine learning team or whatever, and enterprise AI was nascent when I was part of that, and it is thought of as a cost center to start with instead of a revenue making center when you start with AI. And you need to figure out a way in which you need to justify. Some of the ways in which I did that at that point was specifically around how to show that it improves either retention of customers or like increase in value for your end customers. So in our case, for instance, in the procurement side of things, AI can definitely help you save a lot of time, and time is money. So that is easier justification. Okay, yeah, there is this investment, but this is what you're saving. So the investment pays for itself. So it's an easier justification to make it at that point, specifically on the procurement side. And it's not just about the time and the money. It's also about saving or making the process much more easier so that you can use like the remaining time for better faculties. And some of these mundane tasks are like, in terms of employee experience, it becomes much better to use technology to assist you. And that is where, that is how you can justify the investment as like augmented intelligence instead of AI, which is there to replace jobs. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that question. And thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk here, Kathy. I really appreciate all the fantastic questions. Really nice chatting here. And hopefully we'll continue this in the future as well.
Definitely. If you have any other topics you'd like to bring to the ISM community, they'll touch base with me and we'll get that scheduled. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and thanks to the both of you for bringing this important topic to the ISM community, and we appreciate that. At this time, I'll close the program out. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.